Hello, everyone. My name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that you're all having a great day and that you've had a great last couple of days. I know I've had a rough time. I am sorry that the fact that we have not been streaming lately. I have been extremely sick. I'm talking like a fever over 104 and extreme chills. So I was in no condition to be streaming or trying to do this live stream. So I apologize for that, and I apologize that this is probably the only live stream that's actually going to be happening this week. We will not be streaming again until Tuesday. We had some arrangements already made for this weekend. There's this kind of a special occasion for myself and my significant other. So we are celebrating our 4-year anniversary, so we're actually going out of town, which was going to be pre-planned. We were expecting to be streaming all week. I obviously wasn't expecting to get deathly ill. So with that, I do apologize. Of course, we'll be doing another big live stream on Tuesday. But with that being said, there's a lot of news that came out, and so we couldn't obviously fit it all in. Otherwise, this stream would be about 12 hours long. But we did go through and we picked out all of the really big news stories, the stuff that really had big impacts going on. And so without further ado, please check out the description below and check out all of those donation links, because there are millions of people in the world that do need our help and will always need our help, including places like the Horn of Africa, that's Ethiopia, Somalia. Now I'm talking about, of course, Ukraine. You can support both the war effort and humanitarian efforts going on inside the country of Ukraine and the surrounding countries. And also, you can't forget about Southeast Asia. Recovery efforts for things like typhoons take a very long time. And the areas such as Indonesia and the Philippines are no exception. So please don't forget to check them out. These crises are only going to continue to get worse as the situation worldwide continues to deteriorate, especially when it comes to food insecurities, which is starting to become a major factor. And so we're going to go ahead and dive right into the news. And the first thing we have is the fact that on 5/16, so May the 16th, Russia attempted to strike Lviv. However, out of their 8 cruise missiles, 0 actually made it to their target. They were all shot down by Ukrainian air defenses. So, very good news there. Lviv didn't get hit again. The fact that they're still trying to hit Lviv, even though they're seeing diminishing returns. Whenever you're conducting an operation, what you're really wanting to, you're trying to get the most bang for your buck. This is one of my major counterpoints to, I'm sure the U.S. has special forces going on there. Probably not, because it would have really small returns for what the risk is, and the risk for Russia is they're running out of ordnance. They're running out of these big missiles that they can continue firing. They're running out of the components to make them, so they can't restock their stockpiles, and they're running out. And likewise, the U.S. probably has never really had any special forces. If they did, it was probably not in some kind of this really big capacity, maybe at the most advise and assist, but I wouldn't even expect that, because truthfully, you could set a reconnaissance plane out here in Romanian airspace. It has enough range that you could say whatever, you could detect whatever's going on and send all of that information directly to Ukraine or in Poland, and have it just flying around near the border inside NATO airspace, send all of that information to Ukraine real time, and it has a much better returns, and they're already in friendly airspace. There's nothing Russia could do about it. Whereas if Russia found out that there's U.S. special forces operating inside Ukraine, that's a big international incident. So high risk, low reward for special operations inside Ukraine, and low risk, high reward for what you're doing with those aircraft. And that's the strategy we're seeing if you're ever tracking the flight radars. Now, if we move over here into the Kyiv area, first thing we show up here is actually coming out of here today, and that's because the New York Times received more evidence of the war crimes committed in Bucha, and videos they do have posted. However, they are rather graphic, so we're not actually going to pull up the official article. But this is coming from the New York Times Twitter. They got an actual first-person accounts of the incident as well as the video. I have seen the video. It does correspond with some of the images that we actually saw of those executed individuals, specifically in like an alleyway courtyard kind of area. So this was one of the executions that occurred on March the 4th, and further proves that Russian forces were the ones committing these acts. And yesterday, the U.S. officially opened its embassy. There's been small teams of Americans going into the embassy and preparing for its reopening since the first envoys really arrived from the United States. But officially yesterday, it did open. And of course, we're getting this from Al Jazeera. So the U.S. flag now flies once again above the embassy, stating that the ambassador is in town and is back at work. And up here in Desna, we have a couple of different things going on here. So the first thing is the fact that an airstrike on Desna on May the 17th actually ended up killing 8 people and wounding an additional 12. So rather extensive damage. We'll take a look here.
Суки, блядь.
And that's not the only thing, and that's because today a missile strike on the training base there in Desna, it's kind of differing on the source here, but somewhere between 80 and 50 Ukrainian troops have been killed at the training base there up in the Chernihiv region. So we can go ahead and take a look at that as well. So some rather extensive damage there. And as we move up here to the Sumy region, something kind of unexpected happened, and this was the fact that Russian forces attempted to conduct a breakthrough up here. And this is in the Serdina Buda area, which is up in the Sumy Oblast. They attempted several different assaults in this area, trying to cause a breakthrough in Ukrainian lines. All of them were repelled, but an attack this far north kind of goes against whatever they were attempting to do when it comes to really their strategy at this point in the war. There's no strategic reason to be engaging anything up here, conducting infantry assaults up here, because your main body, your force is conducting fighting down here. This is where your objectives are. You've had to cast out your large scale objectives already, and you've had to scale those back and limit those objectives. But at this point, there's not a whole lot that Russia would have been able to do here. I don't understand. It's kind of hard to understand what their point was. Maybe it was supposed to be a little bit of a diversion, maybe to kind of free up a little bit of and cause a little bit of panic up in the north, to kind of free up some of the pressure on the troops down here in Kharkiv, but I just don't see that being really effective. And obviously it wasn't. But we actually have that coming out of the UA Live map here. They were reporting on that. So from the 17th of May. And they are a very good source. We cross-reference with a lot of different sources here, and two of them, especially for this map, normally pick a happy medium between the two sources of the UA Live map, and as well as the study for the Institute of War, which is a very, very reliable source. So I usually pick a happy medium between those two. They both are very thorough in what they're doing. A lot of good evidence to back what's being said in the claims there. But they do differ somewhat, so the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. So we usually kind of cut it straight down the middle when putting together the map. So just if you're wondering where the battle line shifts are coming from, that's usually the case. And as we move up here along the Russian border, as we come down to the Kharkiv Oblast, we actually see on the 16th that Ukrainian forces actually made it to the border. So let's go ahead and take a look. This is pretty cool.
Конечно. Всегда готовы.
Пане президенте, Верховний Головнокомандувач Збройними силами України, доповідаю, сьогодні, 15 квітня, 227-й батальйон 127-ї бригади територіальної оборони України вийшов на рубіж і кордон, на роздільну смугу з Російською Федерацією, з країною-окупантом. Ми дійшли, пане президент, ми тут. Ось з нами прикордонник. Передаємо йому знак за нашою спиною. Який знак прикордонника?
910/1.
Пане президент, ми дійшли. Ми на кордоні.
So, I mean, that you can't prove success probably better than the Kharkiv Oblast, because this area has been embattled for the entire duration of the war. Kharkiv has been under sustained, basically, attack the entire duration of the war. They made initial gains. They pushed around the city. They almost completely cut the city off. They were pushed back. They stayed just outside the city. Clear up into the Donbass offensive started, and then Ukraine started to steamroll them immediately. And they have that train has no brakes on it. It is continuing, and as we can see here, the shift in this battle line, they have basically pushed them all the way up back to the Servi-Donets River, running here in the Kharkiv Oblast, up to about Rubizne, cutting over to Ternova, which is the last town we saw that was liberated, and then cutting all the way across here. There's kind of a bulge in the line, so there's a large area here that's under occupation, and then across the Servi-Donetsk, and they're squeezing it here and basically getting ready to cut off Russian forces in this bulge, and then outside of this bulge, it's all back to the Russian border. So the gains made in the Kharkiv Oblast are insane. The counteroffensive continues, and it is very successful. essentially, once again, the Russian troops are in full retreat, as we were stating before we ended up taking the break. So the evidence is very clear that that is indeed the case. And because of this, Kharkiv isn't really undershelling a whole lot anymore. In fact, it's undershelling so little now that life is actually kind of returning to normal. And we kind of saw a little bit of this as life just kind of goes on. But we'll go ahead and take a look at this video. So there's even calls. A lot of citizens have been. You have to understand they have been shelled for, I mean, at this point, almost 85 days continuously. So the citizens of Kharkiv are still very shaken by what they've had to go through, and there are still a lot of people that are living inside of the metro tunnels. The officials of Kharkiv are actually wanting to get them out of the metro tunnels because they actually want to get the metro back up and running. They feel it's safe enough to start getting these services back up and running and getting people back into going to work and going about their normal lives, because the threat has really diminished to the point that it's allowing for that. But people are so shaken they don't want to leave. They don't believe that the danger is over. Of course it's not. They could still be struck by things like cruise missiles. Much like Lviv or Kiev, but the danger has greatly diminished, and the danger there, is just not there that it was even a week ago. And life has to go on at some point, and that's what they really would like to start happening. And as we can see there in Freedom Square, that's what's happening, at least for those that are starting to come out and actually start getting back to their normal lives. And now we finally move into the Donbass, and there is a lot of news. So the first thing is a little bit of interesting news here, and that's because this is coming from the 16th, and the U.S. troops actually left a message on one of the M777 howitzers that they gave to Ukraine. And we'll go ahead and show you the pictures here. So they are being used in action. They are in combat in Ukraine. And as we can see here, from America with love. And we've seen that painted on a lot of things. From bombs dropped on ISIS to rounds shot at, of course, the Russians at this point. But they are making, some of those U.S. munitions. U.S. troops can't fight in the war, but they certainly can send some encouragements. So very cool that we're seeing that connection from U.S. artillerymen over to the Ukrainian artillerymen that are putting these weapon systems to good use. And we do know they're being put to good use. There's been some, while unconfirmed claims, some very substantial amount of them that the 155s are doing a number on Ukrainian convoys and columns, on Russian convoys and columns. and that precision fire is working extremely well. Keep in mind that this is a very big range extension. Their highest, that 152 caliber, I think it's the DPK 30, which I believe is the largest artillery piece that they have, is 152 millimeters, and they could only go out to about 12 kilometers. This is shooting at like 20 kilometers plus. So that's a lot of extra range that they didn't have originally, and Russia's kind of shooting at the same range still. So very, very interesting, and very good to see that it's made it to the front and is in good use. But the battle for Popasna continues, and we're seeing that the Ukrainian 24th Brigade is still fighting fiercely around Popasna, despite being outnumbered roughly 10-1 in some areas. But they are inflicting heavy casualties on the Russians. And Popasna is actually in the Russian hands, the city is, but not much further than that. They were essentially stopped in the city after Ukrainian forces conduct a tactical withdrawal out of the city. So that is now, we're now stating that is in their hands. We see them kind of pushing up towards Zoloty. But that encirclement, this right here, is a key battle. Because what the Russian forces are attempting to do is encircle Severodonetsk, because that would effectively gain them the control over the entire Luhansk region. And Popasna is one of those axes of advance, just like where they're trying over here near Belohorivka to encircle, and they keep trying to build pontoon bridges, but it's just not working out for them. They just keep getting bombed. But they keep trying to build these pontoon bridges because they can cross the Severodonetsk, and then they can encircle Severodonetsk that way. And same thing with Popasna. They could attempt it from that direction. Either way, even if they did break through, it probably wouldn't be very successful. But it is an encirclement technique, but it's not going very well for them. You can take a look at that here. You can see there's just a couple of good battle maps people have been putting together regarding kind of their axes of advance. But it's just not working. We can see another one here. But you can see where they're kind of pushing there over towards Zoloty, but it's just not working out in their favor, and we all know the reason why, and that's because they just are combat ineffective. And over here in Soledar, we see that on the 17th, the NOF plant was actually shelled by Russian forces. And the NOF plant is actually a German-owned company inside of Ukraine. It's the largest manufacturer of construction material in the country. So they were actually shelled. That factory was actually shelled pretty heavily. We can actually see the video footage here.
Пиздец нам.
Pretty roasty fire. And Bakhmut over here was not spared either, as a residential complex was essentially leveled by Russian forces after a missile hit it. And they essentially, we don't know the casualties, but there's no way there wasn't any, and we do know that there were some. But and take a look here, and you'll see what I mean.
Ай-яй-яй-яй-яй. Просто суки.
I mean, this building, this residential building, has literally been cut in half by this missile. That infrastructure, any support or stability this building had, when you cut it in half, it's not there anymore. There is no structural stability to this entire building anymore. So it's essentially leveled. And it will have to be demolished after the war. And this much damage, I mean, there's no way that no one was injured. And of course, we know that this kind of stuff is a war crime, and purposely targeting civilian infrastructure is a war crime. And we do know that there were casualties, as we'll see in this next video.
О, молодец. Не отключайся.
So you're going to cut it short there to not get too much into it, but that was a child that was pulled out of the rubble there. And we've seen a lot of video footage of the different drones, those quadcopter drones that are dropping those kind of small bombs on everything. And the Ukrainian troops actually have taken a video. It showed how those things actually work, at least the anti-personnel ones. And so let's go ahead and take a look at these, because this is really fascinating. Keep in mind, this isn't something that was, this wasn't something that was a thing before the war started. This is something that someone somewhere sat there with like a 3D printer and designed and came up with and put together and tested and figured out how you would do it off of a UAV or off of a little drone. This is absolutely fascinating how simple and how well this works. So it literally drops it, and it has the pin. And I'm gonna guess and say they probably removed the pin, or it removes the pin. Obviously they didn't. I don't think they hooked it for this because they probably don't want to blow themselves up. But it drops with a hand grenade, and it when it hits, it'll detonate because the spoon gets released. So very cool, very simple, but very effective and very cheap. And when you're talking that's a big key thing in warfare, is how cheap is it. This is one of the reasons why if you ever see the term military grade, you should never trust it. Because all that means is, does it make the standard at the cheapest rate possible? That is what military grade means. Military grade means it will always effectively break without failure. It doesn't mean it's high quality at all. But it does mean that it meets the standards. It can be mass produced. And this is one of the reasons that the anti-tank missiles are so important. Why Stinger missiles are so important. Why Russia losing aircraft and losing tanks is so important. Not just because they're powerful weapons, but because a $30,000 missile can shoot down a $3 million aircraft. You can't keep building $3 million aircraft, but I can keep building a lot of $30,000 missiles. That's the difference. It's bleeding their economy. It's bleeding their war chest. It's bleeding their defense. Because every aircraft they lose, they have to find a way to replace it, even if not now, in the future. And this much money being lost in a war will take decades to recover. This is not a... You have to keep in mind, a lot of this equipment was built during the USSR, where all the USSR did for decades was just dump their entire fund into the military, essentially, in nuclear weapons development. And they built eye-watering numbers of armored vehicles, so there's eye-watering numbers of armored vehicles to be sent into Ukraine. Effective, not effective, doesn't matter. They're tanks. They still cost money, and they're still going to have to be replaced at some point, probably with something much more expensive. And we do know that they can't afford it because they can't even afford really the T-14 Armada right now. Jets are going to be the same way. Really anything that looks expensive, a vehicle, anything, if you can blow it up for the cheap, you're winning. That's why IEDs are so effective. Landmines, I mean, RPGs, anti-tank missiles, because $1.4 million tank, $100,000 anti-tank missile. Well, if I can do it for a 14th of the price, that's instead of using another tank, I can do it for a 14th of the price, and I lose a lot less if it doesn't work. And we have some pretty impressive front line footage that's actually coming out now. The Ukrainian forces, we've seen frontline footage, quote unquote, from things such as like the Kadarovites or the Chechens, especially in and around Mariupol, where we nicknamed them the TikTok army. But the Ukrainian forces have actually taken some frontline combat footage that it's very much genuine combat footage. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they're showing us here.
Дом разбирает это. Далековато. Давай гранату. Едет. Фух.
Куда едет?
Завелся. Далеко, тут и далеко берешь.
Вот так?
Да.
Ветки.
Вот отсюда.
Куда, туда?
Вон, они вот там за забором.
Ooh, that was close. I mean, that'll make you rethink a few things. But that's pretty intense. That if you're close enough to throw hand grenades with your bare fists, and not just launch them out of like a grenade launcher, but if you're close enough to be actually throwing hand grenades, you're in a pickle. You're in a bad situation. That's not, because that means they're close. They are very close. So But very interesting combat footage we're seeing coming out. Some actual combat footage to really give you an idea of what this war's like. That's not just including the massive artillery strikes we're seeing and the airstrikes and everything else, but the actual, I mean, there are still troops on the ground. They're actually fighting in combat in trenches and foxholes and in buildings and going street by street and you know, conducting ambushes and being in these firefights still. So we can't forget that. And we're going to go ahead and skip that one for now because that is actually leading us into Mariupol. And that's because, as you can see here, there is no more defensive line inside of Mariupol. Mariupol has officially fallen. They have surrendered. Ukrainian forces have surrendered in the Azovstal. They have been getting evacuated. And this comes essentially immediately after, on the 15th, the Russian forces hit the Azovstal with what appears to be incendiary munitions, possibly white phosphorus or thermite. And we can actually see that here. Let's take a look. So there is no audio with this, but you can see this is the same munition we've seen in towns all across the country. But they showed this on Russian media, Russian media. I mean, they film this for the world to see. This is a war crime. Like, this is a known war crime. Because this, you can't put this stuff out. But you talk about desperation. They're using incendiary munitions. This burns at thousands of degrees. You can see here Ukrainian soldier inside the Azovstal before they surrendered, getting a little bit of sunlight during one of the small reprieves. But they did, on the 16th, the day after, officially surrendered. They seized the Azovstal steel plant. The wounded troops were immediately loaded onto buses and transported to different parts of the Russian-occupied territories in order to receive treatment. The other defenders who weren't severely wounded were all taken into custody and were moved. And this comes as it seems to be some pre-agreements to a POW exchange. Russian troops for the defenders of the Azovstal. They have this defense will go down in history. This is the stuff that legends are made of. Out of 82 continuous days of combat, the Ukrainian forces were completely besieged for 70 of them. 2.5 months cut off, undersupplied, underfed, lacking water, food, ammunition, with no help in sight, and you still held out for almost a complete 3 months. That is insane. 2.5 months completely besieged. That's an insane defense. That is absolute. That's one of the craziest military accomplishments I've ever heard of, and that's going to be written about for ever. That will never ever go away. They will be studying this for centuries. but there's a lot covering
Це
this. So this is the English subtitles. These have been verified.
повинно піддаватись сумніву. Кожне прийняте рішення, кожен план, кожна операція. Критичне мислення завжди породжувало сумніви в моїй голові, сумніви правильності прийнятого рішення. Це ніколи не виходило за межі розумного і не заважало завжди наполягати на своїй точці зору. В управлінні підрозділами завжди є ризик. На війні немає повністю безпечних планів та операцій. Ти завжди ризикуєш. Головне усвідомити, чи прораховані всі ризики, чи пропрацьований план Б. Чи віддався ти повністю цьому плану, який повинен поєднувати в собі виконання поставленої задачі та максимальне збереження життя та здоров'я особового складу. Можливо, саме тому війна – це мистецтво, а не наука. Коли ти виконав поставлену задачу та зберіг максимальну кількість особового складу. Це і є вища планка управління військами. Тим більше, коли твоє рішення затверджено вищим військовим керівництвом. Слава Україні!
This is why war is an art. No truer words spoken. And this is coming from Ilya Ponomarenko, the Ukrainian troops, the wounded being loaded onto those buses. You can see them in there and being transported out. Reuters as well. They were the first, I believe, to actually report this. I saw this within an hour of them actually reporting it when they first came out. So, yeah, that's how I ended up finding out about this. But they were the first to report it, so if you want to check them out and get some more information on it, there is that. But we can see there, I believe that guy's on oxygen. I mean, these guys are... some of these guys are extremely heavily wounded, and they were completely out of medical supplies. Now, I had someone say I wanted to ask about the incendiary munitions, and they said I had to ask if this is white phosphorus. So that's the thing. There are some big differences, and there are some really big similarities. White phosphorus is really the most commonly used incendiary munition. White phosphorus is capable of being used in a non-direct combat role, and therefore most militaries carry it because white phosphorus is capable of producing smoke. In fact, artillery and mortars carry white phosphorus rounds specifically for screening military or their troop movements. They can fire smoke using white phosphorus or woolly peat, and that provides a smoke screen because it produces this big, thick white smoke that's very difficult to see through, and it covers a large area. And one of the things that makes you wonder if this is white phosphorus is the fact that you start to see some of that smoke start to billow up, that big, thick, white smoke as it's landing. Now, the reason why it could be thermite is the thermite clusters. But as you can see, that really thick white smoke, that haze. So, either way, much thermite is used is also still actively used by both sides. In fact, the U.S. has thermite grenades. The reason you use thermite grenades is in order to disable like artillery guns. You would put a thermite grenade down the barrel, or if you needed to destroy radios, you would put a thermite grenade on top of a couple of radios and pull the pin, and it would literally burn through the radios. It burns extremely hot. The thing with any incendiary munition is that you cannot use it on people. You can use it on depots. You can use it on equipment. You can use it to if it creates and generates a smoke screen. You can use it for conducting that kind of a thing. There's a tactic called a shake and bake. that is using it on people, and you can't do that. There are guys in Fort Leavenworth, if from the U.S. military, who did things such as a shake and bake in Iraq, where they dropped HE rounds or high explosive rounds, shaking the target. The guys came out, they dropped white phosphorus on top of them because they had the smoke rounds at hand and burned them alive. You can't use them on people. It's a war crime. There are guys in prison for life for it as I am saying this. So, yes, you can't do it against people. Either way, thermite, I could be entirely wrong. It could be thermite and not white phosphorus. But either way, you can't use it against people. It's an incendiary munition. And that is the news out of the Azovstal itself. As we move over here, bus loads of dead are being pulled out of the Mariupol Drama Theater. The Mariupol Drama Theater was bombed some time ago. It was being used as a bomb shelter and was clearly marked on both ends on the pavement with the words children when labeling this building as a bomb shelter, and it was labeled in Russian on both sides of the pavement. It still took a direct hit by a bomb, and it was an actual airstrike, and a number of dead is not actually known, but the best estimates right now are stating that there are likely over 600 bodies to be recovered, and already we're seeing entire bus loads of... Well, it looks like that's not going to be pulling up right now. Yep. But there appears to be entire bus loads of bodies being pulled out of there. There is a group, unlike the other recovery efforts where the local citizens are either being conscripted to do it or are just doing it because what else am I going to do but clean up rubble? That's my future anyway. They are not allowed to handle this. Moscow sent in a team to specifically handle this. That is a government team that is conducting that. And the DNR are attempting to restore infrastructure in Mariupol, but they are failing. And that's because they destroyed the city so entirely, they can't even get the water back on because they need both lines to work, both the sewage line and the actual water line. And when they turn it on, not only does it flood, but now it's flooding basements full of bodies, and it's pushing out these highly decomposed bodies of the buried residents out of the basements and into the streets, and some of those that have been buried, it's bringing them up and back out and into the streets. It is just an awful, terrible, because after so much time that's just not, I mean, it's already not a good situation in Mariupol, but that's just got to be awful. I couldn't imagine that. Same thing, I mean, this place has already been pretty much burnt out, but when they tried to turn on the electricity, they caused a bunch of short circuits, and it caused a lot of fires. So even more fires occurred in the city, but they did have some minor success because small areas of Mariupol do now have electricity again. So they're at least trying to get infrastructure back up and running. I'll at least give it to that. They're not very successful. I mean, they were really successful at breaking it all, but they weren't very successful at fixing it thus far. But all of this, especially the Azovstal, brings us back up here to Olenivka. Olenivka is where the Azov troops are arriving. And what's interesting is the fact that we hit on Olenivka before any of this occurred. Olenivka, if we go back, I believe, to the last stream we did, or one of the last streams we did, we actually cover this, which is the isolation colony, or penal colony number 52. The isolation colony is known for being essentially a concentration camp. It was taken over by the DNR. It's known for, you want to talk about systematic beatings, executions, the whole 9 yards. We covered that in an earlier stream, so if you want to go back and check that out. But they did arrive there. We do know that they arrived in Olenivka, or not today, but on the 17th. So that is where they were headed. And up here near in Enahadar, on the 16th, we saw that the nuclear power plant was actually being fortified. So this isn't the only place. We've also, apparently Melitopol is also being fortified. And this comes as, we're pretty sure that they're expecting to probably be pushed back. They're so far behind the lines that it doesn't make much sense. But when you look at what just happened in Kharkiv, there's some pretty reasonable understanding that it very well could come to that. I mean, Kherson, there's been an ongoing counteroffensive in the Kherson Oblast, and it's seen some recent gains. There's been a lot of bitter fighting. But once Kherson once Kharkiv is really cleaned up, these troops who just got done kicking the Russians out of Kharkiv Oblast can now be moved somewhere else. And I wouldn't be surprised if that would be either near Severodonetsk, or if that's going to be over by Kherson to assist with that counteroffensive and get a little bit more fuel on the fire. And that could sweep their flank. Or do a drive straight through the center. I mean, that's a possibility too. But this is well behind the lines, and there's not a whole lot of reason to be fortifying unless you were expecting to need the fortifications there. And speaking of the Kherson Oblast, on the 16th, we saw that civilians continue to flee to Ukrainian territory. And this isn't just a few, this is thousands. Currently, there's over 1,000 cars that are not being allowed to pass by the Russians to Ukrainian lines. But there are thousands of Ukrainians that are trying to get to Ukrainian territory because of the possible fake referendum to create the People's Republic of Kherson, essentially, much like they created the DPR and LPR for Russia, anyway. And the reason why I say for Russia is because, much like Transnistria, you don't see Transnistria on the map of Moldova being labeled as a separate country. Transnistria has been a breakaway region for like 30 years. It's a Russian breakaway region. I mean, there's a Russian garrison in Transnistria, but it's not internationally recognized by anyone but Russia, and so therefore it is still part of Moldova. The People's Republic of the Luhansk and the Donetsk People's Republic, the LPR and the DPR, which are by Russia's account two separate countries, aren't two separate countries because they're not internationally recognized by anybody else. in order to be considered a sovereign country, you have to be internationally recognized. And there are laws in the United Nations on what makes a sovereign country and what does not make a sovereign country, and how you can recognize a sovereign country. There are like 193 sovereign countries in the world, and there are like 203 like nations in the world, or states in the world, meaning things like Taiwan, which because of China is not considered or recognized as a sovereign nation, really only because of China. There are several others, but that happens to just be the main one. And so over here we see that the city of Alexandrivka is really all but destroyed. The bitter fighting in this part of the region, especially down here in the southern part of the Kherson Oblast, has been very bitter. It's been very, after the initial gains from that really big counteroffensive that we saw start to take place, there's been a lot of heavy fighting along the Kherson Oblast. It's been tooth and nail. It seems like at any moment the Russians could really break and really lose that resolve, but it just hasn't happened yet. And we see them, the Ukrainians just keep having to strike the Kherson airport outside of Chernobivka, because we've seen them hit it like 6 or 7 times now. And the Russians just keep coming back. They're well within range. I don't know why the Russians because they keep just losing stuff. But they keep having to just shell this thing and shell this. There isn't going to be an airport left if they have to keep shelling it. But the destruction is absolute. So actually, here's an aerial photo or aerial image of what Chernobivka actually looks like, or Chernobivka, Alexandrivka. And now let's take a look at what it looks like as of the 16th. So as you can see, almost every single one of those houses I just showed you is leveled. This war is really unprecedented in its destruction. Because the thing about humans is we are extremely good at trying to kill each other. We have been doing it since we became a species. And we've gotten very, very good at it. And we continue to get better at it. But the amount of destruction is just immense. You have to understand that this stuff is... the artillery just gets bigger. The bombs get bigger. The weapons get deadlier. And in the course of modern war, what would have taken a day to... what could have taken a day to completely destroy takes an hour now. And so, in modern war, we see entire villages wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, Mariupol is wiped off the face of the earth. Alexandrivka seems to have gotten the same treatment, unfortunately. And that's not the only place. There are countless others. There are probably many that aren't named or aren't majorly named villages and little settlements all across the nation that are just gone, lost to history. But for inside of Ukraine itself, that is it. But there is a lot of other developments internationally, including within inside of Russia and regarding NATO and Ukrainian aid. So we're going to go ahead and immediately roll into the international news. And we're actually going to start up here because there's a couple of different things outside of Moscow. And so that's because Moscow convened the CSTO. The CSTO is essentially Russia's version of NATO, except it sucks a lot more. And there's only like 6 members. And none of them have attempted to assist each other in war. Like Azerbaijan, I believe, is a member of the CSTO. And when they went to war with Armenia, there's supposed to be a mutual defense pact here. Nobody came to help Azerbaijan. Not Russia, not anybody. Azerbaijan was on its own. So there's not really a yeah, let's actually go fight for each other. There's just kind of the we could if we really wanted to. But it includes things like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, and I mean, there's not a whole lot to really, you can really go, yeah, Belarus. It's not like NATO where you have about to be 32 countries in it, all of which are well under the, there's no, question, yes, we will all go to war at the same time if we're attacked. There's no question about it. There's plenty of questions with the CSTO. But they convened not only because it was their 30th anniversary, but because, of course, Finland and Sweden have officially applied to join the NATO alliance. And so they are trying to, I'm sure Russia is trying to win. They're having some manpower issues. So if they can, they want to get some support from CSTO countries. See if they can't get them to finally jump on board. But since Russia's kind of the one attacking, they can't really bring in that mutual defense agreement, despite what the rhetoric is. So we take a look here.
Расширение, в том числе за счет новых членов Альянса, Финляндия, Швеция. У России, хотел бы вас проинформировать, уважаемые коллеги, нет проблем с этими государствами. Нет. И поэтому в этом смысле непосредственной угрозы для нас расширение за счет этих стран для России не создается. Но расширение военной инфраструктуры на эту территорию, безусловно, вызовет нашу ответную реакцию. И какой она будет, мы будем смотреть, исходя из тех угроз, которые нам будут создаваться. То есть, вообще-то, проблемы создаются на голом месте. Но будем соответствующим образом на это и реагировать. Кроме всего прочего, вот кроме этой бесконечной расширенческой политики, Североатлантический альянс еще и выходит за рамки своего географического предназначения, за рамки Евроатлантики. Старается все активнее и активнее включаться в международные вопросы и контролировать международные ситуации с точки зрения безопасности, влиять на них и не лучшим образом в других регионах мира. Это, безусловно, требует дополнительного внимания с нашей стороны.
So that was Russia speaking about it, and essentially all he's saying is Russia has no problem with those states, so there is no direct threat from expansion to those countries, but deploying military infrastructure will provoke a response based on the threats they create for us. Once again, more rhetoric regarding some saber rattling, and that's just them, saying there will be, it's a grave mistake and there will be having far-reaching consequences. But this is likely just more rhetoric because, as I was pointing out earlier to one of the staff members, you can't beat one country. How are you going to beat 33? Because they're about to join NATO, which makes NATO 32. Ukraine's already at war with you. How are you going to beat 33 countries if you were to attack a NATO member? I mean, no, there has to be some way that Finland and Sweden got, they wouldn't have probably progressed unless they got security guarantees. So that's not, you couldn't just outright attack Finland. That's just not gonna work. So how they can continue to make threats, even though they have their entire military committed, and there's even questions if their nuclear arsenal even works at this point, considering how absolutely destroyed everything else is. But still, Russia continues, and on the 18th, we saw them expel 85 diplomats from France, Italy, and Spain. And they also ended up kicking out the employees of that were working in Moscow of the Canadian Broadcasting Channel, or the CBC, which is the Canadian version of the BBC. So, very interesting. This is kind of a tit-for-tat thing. We see a lot of Russian diplomats getting kicked out of countries. Russia returns the favor by kicking guys out of countries. Russia may kick some diplomats out of a country that they think is hostile. The country, whatever country it happens to be, kicks out Russian diplomats. It's kind of just a back and forth thing. But it just further isolates Moscow. That's all it does. And in regards to the Azovstal survivors, the Duma, which is basically the parliament of Russia, may back out of the POW exchange, stating that they want to prevent Nazis from being traded, and they're even willing to be drafting a law to prevent it. But some are even calling for mass executions, which is exactly the reason why they didn't want to surrender. Because they were expecting that they would just be executed. So, congratulations, you're saying exactly what they were thinking, if that is the case. But we can see them here calling for this, and take a look.
Террористическая группировка «Украина» заявила, что сдача боевиков нацистского полка «Азов» – это первый шаг к их освобождению путем обмена. Понятно, что обмен хоть одного из этих преступников будет объявлен коллективным Западом победой Украины. Полагаю, необходимым принять постановление или даже закон, запрещающий обмен кого бы то ни было из нацистских преступников, от тех, кто напрямую участвовал в убийствах мирных жителей, до тех, кто просто разукрасил себя фашистскими татуировками.
Спасибо, Анатолий Александрович. В соответствии с нашим регламентом просьба подготовить соответствующее протокольное поручение. Давайте его проработаем вместе с Комитетом по обороне и безопасности. Вы правильно вносите предложение. Нацистские преступники не должны подлежать обмену. Это военные преступники, и мы должны делать все для того, чтобы они предстали перед судом.
Congratulations. Exactly what... Since when has Russia ever honored its deals? But we'll see if that's actually becomes the case. Putin kind of has a... The Duma is really just kind of a puppet. Because really... It's an authoritarian regime at this point. Putin has complete control. He's just kind of pulling the strings there. So if there's actually going to be an exchange, it's going to be because Putin says there's going to be an exchange. And I'm sure that there was a prior arrangement, and I'm sure that that may be upheld, especially if he wants his prisoners back, because that way he can actually throw them back in the fight. And is Wikipedia a true source or not? And obviously it's true enough that Russia wants to get rid of it, and that's because the Russian Wikipedia page, or Wikipedia, they posted on their Russian Twitter account stating that the Russian government attempted to censor Wikipedia by demanding that articles such as the 2022 invasion of Ukraine and racist be removed. You actually see this here. So, yep. So they actually went to the English Wikipedia, and they got notifications to remove those because it attacks the civil, because it's false information about the losses, attacks on the civilian population, and the goals and form of the special operation. Yeah, no, bud. That's not how that works. But obviously Wikipedia doesn't have to listen to the Russian government, so I guess they'd just have to wait to get shut down inside of Russia, just like everyone else. And over the 16th and 17th, and even probably continuing into today, as Russia continues to kind of saber rattle here about Finland and Sweden joining NATO, they've sent up some Iskander missile batteries up to Finland's border as kind of a show of force. It probably will not amount to anything. Finland is well laying and waiting, and is probably very prepared for Winter War 2.0, in which case I'm sure the White Death will rise out of his grave and come back for more Russians, but let's take a look here.
Не успел президент Финляндии сказать, что они вступают в НАТО. Целый дивизион Искандеров в количестве 7 штук. Ну, это дивизион 7 штук. И новой техники движется в сторону Выборга. Вот новая воинская часть в Выборге сейчас, походу, и образуется. Ну, под Выборгом где-то. Потому что техника нулячая идет. Уральчики вон технику перегоняют. Так что готовьтесь, финики, к вступлению в НАТО. Да, походу он это машинное обеспечение, прям новые Уралы гонят. 7 Искандеров. Походу идет формирование новой воинской части. Молодцы.
And the reason why we know this probably isn't going to escalate to anything, despite the fact that they're sending all the Iskander missile batteries up here, because if they were to fire the Iskander missile batteries, what happens then? Because there's no ground troops up here. There's no like buildup of ground troops to maybe in near St. Petersburg or something, but there's no like major buildup of ground troops. They don't have nearly enough troops to cover this front. Because, I mean, this literally doubles NATO's border with Russia. So, there's no, like, major massive troop. Like, Finland could literally just start waltzing across the border and just start annexing parts of Russia. And for the fact that that they're running out of, like, ballistic missiles and they're running low on manpower and equipment, they sure are sending a lot of things in a lot of different directions to intimidate people, despite the known issues that they're facing. And we see even more of that here. Oh, they're sending more artillery pieces. Fancy. I mean, you can't win a ground war with just a bunch of artillery guns. And we have a couple different things here. The first thing is actually from the 15th, and that's because in Gukovo, the military registration office was Molotov cocktailed. So this has become the 11th incident that we know of over the last, like, about 24 hours. Sorry, over the since the beginning of the war, it's the 11th incident that we know of. They don't know who caused it. They did put out the fire. There are no casualties other than the building. But in state security teams are looking for the individuals who did this. But on the 15th, fires at military registration offices were recorded in the Volgorod, Ryazan, and Rostov regions of Russia. So, 11 total. And the fires in Russia continue, as we see in Novosibirsk, which a chemical plant was on fire. So we don't know what caused the chemical plant to be on fire. There are some suspicions, considering how many major fires there have been in Russia in the last recent weeks. But we can go ahead and take a look here. So, another nice big roasty fire and some important infrastructure there in Russia. And, of course, we have the news of Sweden and Finland sending in their official NATO applications. So, this is something they sent in jointly, but to show you the level of how much it's changed. The ideology of neutrality has changed. 188 out of 200 members of Finland's parliament voted in favor of joining the NATO alliance. That is an overwhelming majority that wanted to join the alliance. That is how much Russia's war in Ukraine has changed the security outlook. Sweden and Finland have been out of military alliances for 200 years. They have not been part of a military alliance. Both countries have not been part of a military alliance for 200 years. So that in and of itself says something. But that's not without pushback. And that's because Turkey may veto Finland and Sweden's NATO bid. So Erdogan, who's the president of Turkey, said that he will vote against both Sweden and Finland joining NATO because of claims that the countries support anti-Turkish terror groups in Syria, aka they support the Kurds. And this is likely to cause a splintering of certain NATO countries. Really, it would just splinter Turkey. The issue is that, the issue is the fact that they don't like the terrorists. The terrorists are the Kurds, the SDF. The SDF who are up here in northern Syria, the Peshmerga that are up here in northern Iraq, that were fighting against ISIS, really were the ones that were spilling a lot of blood on behalf of the Western world, who really didn't want to take any more casualties after coalitions in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Kurds really picked it up and were really the ones fighting that battle, especially in the north and in Syria, alongside with special forces. And they gave a lot for that, and they are very much a Western the Kurds have very much a Western ideology, just like you do have things such as communist parties, even in the United States. Whether or not you agree with it, they do exist, and they do have some following. Same thing with the Kurds. They have groups that are democratic, and they have groups that are, a communist group, such as the PKK. But a lot of them, the YPG, YPJ, YPK, they're not Marxists or communists. They're all democratic. The fact is that Turkey just hates Kurds. They really just hate Kurds. I don't know how else to say it. I've seen it time and time again. I've witnessed it in person. They just hate the Kurds, period. They hate them as a people, I'm pretty sure. And Turkey, out of all the NATO allies, probably is not the greatest one in the world at all. There's a lot of things that I could just see Turkey just leaving the NATO alliance. And there's even been talks of, can we literally just kick Turkey out of the NATO alliance? We've sanctioned Turkey. I mean, and Turkey's a NATO ally, and we've sanctioned them. So, I really don't know what else to say, but he says that there are legitimate security concerns. Finland and Sweden supporting terrorists. I have a hard time believing it, and so does the rest of the world. And as we roll into the Middle East, we have some interesting news. And that's, of course, on the 16th, there were more violent clashes between Palestinians and Israeli police. So shortly after, of course, the funeral of the protest, or unfortunately, the journalist who was killed, where there was also some rather violent police action. Another violent police action was taken in East Jerusalem after Israeli police started to attack a crowd that was conducting a funeral for a protester who had been killed. And we can see the results of that attack. Yeah, things in Israel are just not very good right now. Israel and Palestine. I would not travel to the region right now. Israel has done some very questionable things in how they are handling the issues. There has always been a lot of tension between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and this is not helping. Especially the videos that we saw and we even aired here regarding the journalist. It was an Al Jazeera journalist who was killed. And thousands of people showed up, and they almost dropped her coffin when she was being carried out, and they were beating one of the carriers of the coffin. So I can't say I exactly agree with how the Israeli police is handling the situation in Israel, personally. But moving on into Iraq, we see that the dust storms that have taken their toll, as more than 2,000 Iraqis have actually suffocated as a result of the dust storm in the Salahuddin and the Al-Anbar governorates alone. So those are two of the most heavily affected governorates. And we can see these dust storms are thick. They are not very pleasant. It feels just as it sounds, it would feel like, and that is that you're choking down sand. It is absolutely a terrible time. I would not go through it again, and I do not envy anybody trapped in this situation right now. I would say the one thing worse, and at least you would be able to breathe somewhat better, but I'd say the one thing worse than a normal sandstorm is when it rains while there's a sandstorm. Because then it just rains mud. I had to go through that one time, and that was absolutely miserable because it gets in everything. Worse than just the sand. And in Baghdad, there's a couple of different developments here. And the first one is that there's some reports of really excessive force being used on the part of the of those in the Iraqi security forces. And that's because female prisoners of war are relative of ISIS fighters, essentially, that are in Rusafa prison in Baghdad, are among the victims. There are natives of different countries and of Europe, but basically they were refusing to let prison workers search the women prisoners, and so they essentially brought in a special squad. They used a bunch of tear gas against them and proceeded to beat them even when there was children in their cell. And so other prisoners began banging on the bars in protest, in which tear gas was used against them. And then any women who actually ended up resisting after that were actually just detained and taken away. But they were apparently all released following the incident, but some of them ended up suffering from some suffocation and coughing. So, a little bit excessive, especially with kids around. And today, there are protests in Baghdad, really calling for the protection of the LGBTQ community. And this is because some unspecified people were kind of wearing camouflage and had a bunch of sniper rifles, essentially, and were really targeting and being aggressive against this community, as we can see. So this part of the world really is not very friendly regarding the LGBTQ plus community. It just is not a good place for that. The laws, especially, the culture, it's just not a very safe location to really be yourself in a lot of ways. It's very different from a lot of Western nations, and there is a lot of, especially with security concerns, because ISIS is still very active in this region. They have not lost their caliphate for very long. It's only been a couple of years, so they're still very highly active, and they definitely would kill you. And this is probably ISIS. Would not be surprised if it was an ISIS thing, or just another militant group. You can take your pick. There's plenty. And there's a large fire that started yesterday in Dakuk province, which is in Iraq. And this is a wheat field that's been on fire. So the really big concern about this is there's already a problem. There's a drought going on. They're expecting to have a famine, and now what little food you do have that's growing right now is now on fire. You talk about really bad luck. You can see that field just up in flames out there. So you want to talk about bad luck? That's some rather poor luck. And we can see up here in the Dahuk province that some of the Yazidi refugees. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time pronouncing anything tonight. But the Yazidi refugees were actually fleeing from a bunch of fighting that was going up in this area, but especially in Sinjar. But they just can't catch a break because their tents were burned down. So not only did they already lose their home, they also lost their home away from home while they're out and trying to flee. So I really hope whoever did that gets caught and is severely punished. And in Tehran, and just in Iran in general, we see a ton of protests, and these protests have erupted all over Iran over the sharp rise in food prices. They're smashing shops, they're clashing with police, one person's already been killed. I mean, bread and flour products have increased by about 300%. I mean, milk and vegetable oil has jumped. I mean, this is, when you're talking about food insecurities, when crises like this happen in countries that are already kind of having issues, like Iran does, because Iran's under sanctions, that's where you see even worse situations arise, because it affects them even more. Like, while your fuel may, or your food may rise, or your inflation may rise by, 3% or whatever, and it sucks because when you go to the store, you're spending $450 or $500 instead of where you would spend $400 for 2 weeks worth of groceries. They're spending 300% more. That's just a ridiculous increase. So, you can take a look here. Some more chaos in Iran. And as we move over here into Afghanistan, we have a couple of different developments. So first of all, we can see here that today, specifically this morning, a bus carrying Taliban was actually blown up in mazir-i-sharif. So apparently there was a bunch of dead and wounded. At least 3 wounded were announced by Taliban officials. Of course, the Islamic State claimed the attack and said that they killed and injured about 10 10 Taliban fighters. Mazar-i-Sharif has been a pretty big hotbed for this activity, as well as several other regions, especially in this northwestern area of Afghanistan, because it's along the borders, and also next to over here in Iran. So kind of this region here. But we can take a look. So there is the bus. Absolutely destroyed. And that is the Islamic State announcement claiming responsibility. And the fighting in the Panjshir actually continues. So the fighting in the Panjshir is against Ahmad al-Massoud's forces, this is Ahmad al-Massoud Jr., I should be more specific. His father, who he passed away, he also fought the Taliban back in the 90s and the early 2000s and was very successful at doing so. So he knows what he's doing. He's also very well connected, so he can actually fund a group to do this. But the Taliban and the Federal Tax Service of Afghanistan, also really just the Taliban, are trying to really take back control of this region. For Ahmed al-Massoud, it's the only region they don't really control in Afghanistan, and it's really spurring other resistance movements because it kind of brings hope to the people. They haven't had control of this the entire time they've had control of the country. This movement started literally as the U.S. withdrew, but they're still fighting. They have been they're reportedly repelling attacks by the Taliban, who are even bringing in what little air force they have, and they're bringing in artillery and heavy equipment, and they just aren't making any gains thus far. So they just haven't been able to do anything. They're trying to push them back into the mountains, but it just isn't working. And in and in Kabul, we can see that talks between Iran and Afghanistan continue, and this is as they are talking about field mining. So they're currently trying to discuss it. They're trying to build different relationships. The Taliban are trying to build relationships with neighbors, trying to build some kind of cooperation because their nation really is in trouble. Even for them, they're in a severe economic crisis. They have a lot of insecurities with food, water, basic necessities, energy. They need to build some kind of a political relationship, a legitimate relationship with countries around them, whether that's Pakistan or Iran. They need to start doing that. They've consolidated really their power in Afghanistan and set up their government and how they plan to run things. Now they need to actually build relationships to make it sustainable. And so that's what they're doing here. They're talking with Iran and Iranian oil or mining companies in Afghanistan, and their conversation was rather positive, at least according to the Iranian side. And so they want to get some Iranian mining companies in there and start looking at some of those different various minerals, valuable minerals that could be mined out of Afghanistan and bring some profit into the country. So hopefully that is going to, I guess we'll see how that goes. Let me see here that meeting. So a lot of interesting information coming out of Afghanistan today. And as we move up into Tajikistan, we even have more information. So the thing is that Tajikistan isn't all that stable. A lot of the countries in the Middle East, there's a lot of countries that just aren't stable. Tajikistan, you really don't hear about a whole lot, but Tajikistan has its own issues, of course. And in the city of Karag, protests are taking place, which actually resulted in at least one person being killed. And this is because they have a tightening. There's a tightening of the regime there in Tajikistan. And this is kind of a autonomous region, or a semi-autonomous region, the Gorno-Badakhshan, and they're actually arresting natives. So the Internal Affairs has stated that it was an organized and illegal rally in order to violate public security, intimidate the population, influence state authorities to make decisions in the interest of persons engaged in illegal criminal activities, which is what they're saying about native individuals in their country. And we can see that these were rather upsetting. These guys were pretty upset
Nichtam korbelas. You machines, miskan. Aglosham go top.
And the protests actually continued into yesterday. And so this is along the border region with Afghanistan, mind you. But they're demanding the dismissal of the governor, who is Alicia Mirzanabat, and a number of other officials within the security forces from their posts. The reason is the murder of one of the inhabitants of the province during the suppression of protests in November last year. So the protests back then didn't really lead to anything, and it may not lead to anything now. They ended up blocking a highway to China, and the government announced an anti-terrorism operation to suppress bandits that threatened the country's sovereignty and committed anti-constitutional actions. So they officially went from being protesters to terrorists. 9 were killed and 24 were injured. One of the police officers was killed and 13 were injured, and 70 opposition, so 70 protesters, were also arrested. So while protesting, they went from being just protesters to being terrorists, and they basically just opened up. So Tajikistan is not having it. And neither is Sri Lanka, except Sri Lanka isn't handling it very well. And that's because Sri Lanka is essentially on the verge of absolute collapse as a country. Like, it's just going to fall apart like a cookie after you lay it in milk for a little bit too long. It's just not going to go well. And that's because they've run out of fuel. They had 24 hour. They made an announcement. They had 24 hours left of fuel reserves. That 24 hours is over. We couldn't report that because I was sick. But they're out of fuel, and therefore they're out of electricity. They're out of medical supplies. There's open protests and essentially rebellion in the streets. The police have killed over 200 protesters, and they still just won't stop. Okay, it's not working. Their control measures aren't working. The prime minister has stepped down. The president refuses to step down. The guy that's in the new prime minister has been prime minister 5 times over, and was picked by the president to be his prime minister. So they're not happy, and the food is getting ready to run out. And Sri Lanka is in absolute chaos. I don't know how else to describe it, but we can take a look at some of this here. Yeah, people in Sri Lanka are not very happy. I'm pretty sure if the president doesn't step down, if they were to ever find him, it's game over for him. That's probably the likely chance. Because they're starving, they're hungry, they have no power. What would you do? And North Korea. So there's been a lot of developments. So it wasn't very long ago North Korea said that they had their very first COVID-19 case. Well, as of today, they have over 2 million now cases of COVID-19, specifically the Omicron variant. And nobody in North Korea is vaccinated. And this includes 63 deaths. Now, that number is believed to be low, just because North Korea really doesn't ever want to paint itself in a bad light, and anything coming out of Pyongyang just is not considered accurate information, including the fact that this is the first COVID cases that they have. But saying it is, they have over 2 million now, and they're officially releasing numbers. They have mobilized the military to come in and fight the pandemic, and they actually held a nice big ceremony regarding it. So, and take a look.
시민군 군의 부문의 전투원들과 국방을 받아안고 오늘의 준엄한 악성 비루스를 발하시는 김정은 동지 방역대전의 일선 참전자로서의 남다른 자긍심을 안고 말했습니다. 수도 비상 조선노동당 조선인 명의로 된 파견장이 수여됐습니다. 현지로 출발하는 전투원들을 군인 가족들이 뜨겁게 환송했으니 가다토록 하려는 열의를 안고 현지에 도착한 전투원들은 의약품 공급 사업에
Also, that's a lot of people to put together when you have 2 million people in the middle of a pandemic and nobody's vaccinated. I just want to point that out. There's just people on the side of the street waving these guys goodbye like they're going to the hospital. Also, why are you outside? There's nationwide lockdowns. But anyway, they're mobilizing their military in order to fight the pandemic and also enforce the lockdowns, because there's a grave concern inside of North Korea itself. While they may not be vocalizing it, the fact that they are saying now that they're having the very first COVID-19 is kind of showing that they may be looking for some international help with this incident now that it's kind of grown out of whatever they could control previously. So we'll see how that goes. And that would probably come from China, if anyone else. And a couple of different developments here in Africa, and we can see here on 5/17 or May the 17th that violent skirmishes occurred in Tripoli between the Prime Minister and his major rival and their backing entities. So his direct competitor, who's recognized by the UN, is considered himself the Prime Minister, Abdelhamid Dabiba, I'm sorry, and who was confronted essentially by Prime Minister Fathi Bashaghi in Tripoli. After several hours of skirmishes and fighting with the military supporting him, Bashaghi left the capital. So the politicians each kind of blame each other with what's going on. There's no really information regarding what's been going on regarding the victims. But the Prime Minister kind of confusion has kind of failed to actually hold really good presidential elections in 2021 or 2022. So the dates of the voting were agreed to a year earlier, and it was under suspicions from the UN. But basically, Abdiba's term ended on February 2022. So that's kind of the problem. And Badiba really didn't agree with the decision. So we can take a look here regarding those. So as you can see here, as you just heard, that's pretty heavy fighting. So, a very interesting development in Libya, especially regarding that political situation. So it really sounds like Badiba really just kind of wants to keep his power. So we'll see how that goes. The last guy that had that happen to him in Libya, well, he's not alive anymore. His name was Muammar Gaddafi. And the people of Libya really didn't take too kindly to Muammar Gaddafi when they found him. And in Mali, yesterday, 3 UN peacekeepers were injured near Timbuktu. So there is a UN mission inside of Mali regarding kind of the violence going on there. Anyway, they fired some militants and ended up engaging the UN forces. They were all taken to the hospital, and their condition is currently being assessed as being serious, but no group has specifically taken responsibility for the attacks. Now, there is a number of groups fighting inside of the region, including that of ISIS. So it could have been an ISIS attack for all we know. But unfortunately, yes, some UN peacekeepers were engaged there in Mali. And this also comes as just a day prior, Mali leaves the Sahel Alliance. So the Sahel Alliance was meant to really keep the peace here in the Sahel region, which is kind of this area here. Include kind of like the Western Sahara and Mauritania, Mali, parts of Algeria. You know, that's kind of the Sahel, and kind of keep security as well as kind of keeping, you know, the interests of the countries of the West together. But basically, it later became known that on May the 12th, there was another military coup attempt in the country, according to Mali officials, saying that it was in the in one of the countries of the West's interests. And really what this has been conducting, what this Sahel Alliance has been doing, is really trying to keep security, stability inside the region, especially with a lot of militant groups. ISIS is being a big problem. Al-Qaeda is a big problem. Al-Shabaab is a problem. And there is obviously some failings with different organizations. So this includes even the Wagner PMC group. So they just haven't been able to keep up with the militants, and the fact that Mali's pulling out of essentially any defense agreements it has. The military junta there is just literally pulling out of every military and defense agreement they've ever had. We saw them pull out of the one with France. They're pulling out of the one with the Sahel. They don't like the Wagner group, so they don't like the Russians. They don't like the West. They don't like Africa. What do they want security wise, besides themselves, which they're not faring too much better. So there is their official statement. As you can see, like, this is run by a military now. Like, the government's a military group now. And colonel. And in Somalia, Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud won the presidential election. So Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud actually held the post in 2012 and 2017, became the head of state for the second time. The elections were delayed over a year due to lockdowns and a lot of attacks by the Al-Shabaab militants who are actually Al-Qaeda linked. They basically are just, Al-Shabaab is literally just Al-Qaeda in Somalia and other parts of Africa. But basically what they're expecting to see is Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud has a really good relationship with the United States, and no more than 500 U.S. personnel from other African countries are going to be sent to Somalia. And this is after, at the end of 2020, 700 troops were actually withdrawn from neighboring countries such as Kenya and Djibouti. So this is a growing threat of a lot of terrorist forces in the region, and Washington is kind of changing its mind on its position here regarding that situation. So we can actually see that here. There he is, the new president. So very cool, very cool. Hopefully that brings a little bit of peace and security to Somalia. We're going to jump over here, finally, into North America. And James Vasquez. James Vasquez is an American volunteer who is fighting in Ukraine. He's posted a lot of videos, gotten a lot of support, gave a lot of good information, some pretty cool stuff in the front. He describes kind of a couple of tense situations that almost got him killed, and he decided it's time to go home. So I don't say I blame him. Everyone kind of has that point. That's one of the reasons why I'm not in the military anymore. I was like, yeah, okay, I've seen enough now. I'm done. So let me take a look here. There's a hallway standoff, apparently. So he says he just landed in New York. Basically, they're all on the same team, right? And they all, looks like they were all doing something together, and they couldn't identify each other very well. And he was like, okay, yeah, it's time for me to leave. That's just too close. Something like that. So luckily no one did end up getting killed, but that's an understandable, yeah, we're going. I'm going home. So a little close shave there. And down here in Washington, we can see that the U.S. has officially approved, or the Senate has approved at least, the $40 billion Lend-Lease aid package to Ukraine. And so the president is expected to sign that into law tomorrow, or really today if you run on Eastern time. Now that the day is just changed over. But he's expected to be signing that here shortly. And that's not the only thing, because today the president also hosted leaders of Finland and Sweden because of that NATO bid. So he, along with many other countries, are going to be very vocal about supporting Finland and Sweden as they are going for that NATO application. Germany has been very vocal of their support. Poland has been very vocal. The UK has been very vocal. Really, every other country but Turkey has been vocal about supporting them. Turkey is literally the only one. Everyone else is totally on board with this. Turkey is just being stubborn. That's usually the case when it comes to NATO. Turkey's just kind of isolated by themselves in NATO. But you can see it here. They invited the presidents of both countries to the White House. And not only that, but the Pentagon actually released today the newest information regarding an aid package. So that's because right here we have the official press release from May the 19th coming from John F. Kirby. So 18 additional 155 millimeter M777 howitzers, 18 tactical vehicles to tow those howitzers. And they're getting some more. They're getting 3 more additional to get counter battery radars, counter artillery radars, so that way they can tell where that incoming fire is coming from, and field equipments and spare parts. Now, this is often not the all-encompassing thing. This is the big ticket items. Everyone's wondering what we're gonna send. You want to give them some. You don't want to give them all. You kind of gotta lead them on a little bit. That's kind of the thing with press releases, right? You got to give them enough to keep them fed. But so everyone's always wondering, what's the U.S. going to be sending next? What's the U.S. going to be sending next? So they are looking at really what can we afford to lose, what's going to put us at risk. There's constant reassessments that have to go on regarding, because the U.S. has to maintain minimum requirements for stockpiles. Companies have to be able to produce enough. Keep in mind, the U.S. is not in like a total war phase. We're just supplying another country. We're not boosting up the military industrial complex at all. There's not a huge, we have a pretty good one, but it's not like World War II, 1943, 95% of everything the U.S. does goes to the war effort kind of thing. It's just your average peacetime military industrial complex. What do we need to defend ourselves and do small missions? So there's a minimum stockpile requirement in case there was a war. They have to maintain that, and so we have to be very careful about how we send things and to make sure not to deplete that. But it looks like we're still well above what we need to be, and we're able to deploy more howitzers and vehicles and whatever else is needed. So very cool. I'm happy to see it. And this is just the $100 million additional security assistance. So that $40 billion one is really going to be, that's opening the market and slashing prices by 99%. And out in here in San Diego, a drug tunnel was found. So San Diego sits right next to the Mexican border here, actually next to Tijuana, Mexico. And they found a 600-yard long, which is about 550 meters for those that go by the metric system, tunnel that was dug for drug smuggling. And I'm sure you could also use it for human trafficking as well. I'm sure it's used for both, but they are using, or it's supposedly being used for drug smuggling. And we're getting this from All Source News, but they're saying that the authorities have found this. And this isn't unheard of. There's been tunnels found all the time along the border. A lot of them are in places such as in Texas or in New Mexico or Arizona, just because there's a lot more kind of open area around here, not really Tijuana. But there's a lot of different things that are done in order to smuggle. We've seen submarines, we've seen planes and trains and cutting different compartments into trucks. There's all sorts of things that they try to do to smuggle drugs into the country. So digging really complex tunnels that require a lot of thought and engineering art is not out of the realm of possibilities. And finally, to end the night, we actually go back over here to a pyramid. I'm actually going to zoom in here. This is the pyramid of Djoser. And it's a step pyramid. So it's a much earlier type of pyramid than like the pyramids of Giza. But next to this, they've actually found a tomb. And this is on the 17th. They found a tomb of a man named I'm going to really try to pronounce it and probably butcher it. Tujetsu. It's about 4,300 years old. And he was an official who claimed that he had access to secret royal documents. It was found next to the step pyramid, which was constructed about 4,700 years ago in Saqqara. So, very interesting. His other titles included the Inspector of the Royal Estate. He was also a priest in the mortuary cult of Pharaoh Teti. No family members are ever mentioned in in the hieroglyphs, but they believe that there's a possibility that the larger complex may be, but their entire burial chamber has not been really excavated yet. They believe that the rest of the chamber could actually hold his family's remains as well. So there seems to be a larger complex underneath. We'll have to see how that is, but very cool. Take a look here. So you can see some of those hieroglyphs there. Very careful excavation work. And of course, we're getting this off of Live Science, who always has something cool. So, very cool indeed. Especially coming out, I really don't hear a whole lot of stuff coming out of Egypt. It's always like they seem to have found all of the stuff to find in Egypt, when I know that's not the case. There's entire lost cities somewhere in Egypt, I'm sure. But there's a lot of stuff regarding the pyramids that we just don't know of. And a lot of things that we still have to learn. I'm sure there's plenty of different famous tombs that just are hidden underneath the sands, and entire cities hidden underneath the sands that could tell us a lot more about ancient culture there in Egypt and along the Nile. And with that, that is actually all of the news for the night. There's a ton of it to run through. I'm sorry if I seem like I was just kind of running through it one right after the other. There's just a ton of it tonight, and that's just because we haven't been able to report on what's been going on. When we normally take a break, it's only for like a day. So you got about 48 hours to cover. This is a lot to cover, and this is just the highlights. So once again, I apologize for that break. I just haven't been feeling very well. Actually, we actually ended up going to the doctor, and they don't know what it was, but whatever it is, it seems hopefully to be going away. But we are taking kind of a special occasion. We had some plans already for this weekend So we will not be streaming again until Tuesday. So another 4-day break. I was hoping to stream this entire week and actually be announcing that on Monday, but it didn't work out that way. So, but we will be taking another break. It is me and my significant other's 4-year anniversary, so we're going out of town. But I hope that you guys enjoyed the news. I hope that you guys are happy that we're back and up and running. We will be covering a whole bunch of news again on Tuesday. Once again, we'll play the normal catch up for you guys. Make sure not to miss any beats. Hit all those highlights. But there's obviously a lot going on in the world, as you can just see by the number of these dots. So what this tells you is there's a lot of people that this is affecting all over the place. So especially places such as Ukraine, places like Africa. And so please check out the description below and check out the different fundraiser links that are listed there. There's a ton of them for Ukraine. There's a bunch of them for all different parts of the world. Ethiopia, Somalia, Southeast Asia. You can't forget about those other places. Ukraine is the main focus right now, but even for Africa, if for that Horn of Africa region, children under the age of 5 are going to be especially impacted. So please make sure you're checking that out. We want to be a continuing force for good, and we want to be the news that gives back. And we can only do that with your support. If you can't give a lot, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, I understand. Give us a like and subscribe. It helps us reach more people, and that means more donations that we can end up giving back to these people. And we did vet these different links. They do. All of these links have like an 80% or more actually goes directly to their programs. One, Brother's Brother, which is currently doing stuff for Ukraine right now, 99.6% I believe of their donations actually goes to the programs themselves. So it directly helps people when you want to kind of stay away from the ones that everything goes to the salaries and the administration. So with that, just kind of go through, peruse. If you have some more that you would like to throw on there, let us know and we can get it vetted. And you can do that by joining us on our Discord. It's got an awesome community anyway. You can pick my brain if you wanted. There's a lot of stuff that gets posted there by the community members. Some of it even ends up on the stream every once in a while. So check that out as well. The link is also in the description. But if you have any fundraisers that we could do, anything that we could vet, we'll put it through the vetting process to make sure that money actually is going where it needs to go, that it's a registered charity, and that we'll see what the costs are going, where its allotments are going, look at its records and everything. And if it checks out, if it checks all the boxes that we have for them, we'll end up getting that actually added onto this and onto the Discord on our official links. But with that, that's all I have. So I hope that you guys are having a great day. I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday. And I hope that you guys have a great weekend, because I won't see you guys again until Tuesday. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful time. I hope that you remain safe, that your family remains safe, and that your friends remain safe. And if not, I hope they find that safety and security in the very near future. And with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful night. I'll talk to you guys later. All right. Bye.